One thing COVID brought us that could be celebrated is more people on bikes. And in particular, a lot more folks got involved with Zwift and Peloton and Trainer Road. When in-person competition was shut down, we raced each other on our screens. And what did we notice through all that? It gets really hot when you're trying to chase someone down, sprint, or rip up a mountain while sitting on your trainer.
Oh, it sure does. I wonder how many electric fans were sold during those times. For me, 4. I bought a lot of fans when I was racing more or less inside. Best anti-misery money I have ever spent. Hopefully, most people who were new to indoor racing have kept up their riding and their training. For me, the stationary training and the intense heat that goes with it, oh man, it is such a thing. I am so glad that our friends at Shimano have been paying attention. They've responded to these hot workouts with an entire line of shoes designed to be ridden indoors, because in addition to your body getting hot, your feet suffer too. Have you ever heard of squelch foot?
I have not heard of squelch foot. Sounds terrible.
When sweat runs down your legs and pools at the bottom of your shoes, it is awful.
Sounds disgusting.
It is.
Sounds humid. You should go to Shimano Shoe Department. Shimano has 8 models good for indoor riding. Maybe they'll take care of the squelch problem. I don't know. They don't say so on the webpage itself. But what they do show are 4 models that are specifically designed for riding on a trainer. Women have 3 of those models, in fact. Good for the ladies. They have the IC2, the IC3, and the IC5. All of the indoor models share a heat-dissipating characteristic, a lightweight mesh upper. Enclosure is either BOA or Velcro. No hips or laces to delay you getting into your shoes and into your workout. All shoes are 2-hole mountain bike pedal compatible. Just what a Leadville racer needs, because of course you'll be riding mountain bike pedals in the 100. Mrs. Hottie, she loves her indoor training shoes by Shimano.
You know, I don't have a say yet, but I will tell you, Hottie, my birthday is coming soon. Just dropping a little hint here. And as you know, Shimano shoes are the only cycling shoes that I wear, and that's been true since long before this podcast ever began. They are just the most comfortable shoes around, with an incredible variety of sizes and, importantly, widths.
Shimano has an entire page on its site dedicated to indoor training. So if you're on the trainer and your dogs are barking, check out the Shimano solutions. And thanks to Shimano for being the title sponsor of this show. Leadville, the podcast for the 100-mile mountain bike race presented by Shimano. Find them at bike.shimano.com. It is Season 6, Episode 9 of the show that breaks down, builds up, gets you ready, and freaks you out for the highest, hardest one-day mountain bike race in the country. I'm Michael Houghton, Hottie to most.
And I am Fatty. You know, Hottie, recovery is one of the pillars of training. And frankly, we haven't spent enough time on this show talking about that aspect of preparation. And maybe because as far as what to do, it seems pretty obvious. You get off your feet, you get some food in you, you get a massage, get rehydrated, get some sleep, and then you get ready for the next bout of training.
That's right, Fatty. Pretty straightforward stuff. But how do you know if you are getting it right? And how do you know if you are ready for that next bout of training? Many endurance athletes have turned to wearables to monitor sleep and recovery. And in this show, we take a look at this growing trend with a person who should know, and that is Dr. Kevin Sprouse. Dr. Sprouse looks after pro riders going much harder than any of us, and he helps them monitor their rate of recovery.
And speaking of pros, a big shout out needs to go to Envy, because a pro they support has won the Tour of Flanders. And he won this very important monument on Envy wheels and with Envy handlebars.
Maybe you saw Tadej Pogačar crossing the finish in Belgium, hands in the air, and not on his Envy bars, at least temporarily, celebrating his terrific victory. Pogačar became only the 3rd rider in history to win a Tour de France and the Tour of Flanders. And the last one to do it was Eddie Merckx. Beneath the Slovenian on the day was a set of Envy SES 4.5 wheels, and except as he crossed the finish, Pogačar had his hands on an Envy SES handlebar.
In fact, his entire team rides Envy wheels and bars, Envy's not a huge player in the pro peloton, but when the chance came along to back Pogacar and his UAE team, Envy was all over it, and with good reason. As the crowd roared in Belgium and as Pogacar crossed the line, of course, so did the staff and a lot of us at the Envy headquarters in Ogden, Utah.
We know this is a show that puts the spotlight on mountain biking and its related equipment, but what's cool is cool, and it was really cool seeing that Envy logo coming spinning across first at the Tour of Flanders. So congrats to Envy and Pogacar for the Tour of Flanders winning wheels and all the great carbon components that can be used on your bike. Go to envy.com. That's ENVE.com.
What is a good strategy for staying ahead of the cutoff times?
What do the experts say about sleeping effectively at altitude, and what do you each do?
For Leadville, hardtail or full suspension?
Yeah, good question.
Okay, Leadville frequently asked questions, LFAQs for short. We are taking a shot at answering your questions about the Leadville Trail 100 this year. Fatty, this is like old school talk radio, where people call in, make a comment, ask a question, and then the host pretends to have an answer. So if you hate the name LFAQs, we could start calling this, Leadville Talk Radio.
Does talk radio still exist? Hottie, I like LFAQs. That's what I'm going to call it. So let's stick with that acronym.
All right. Our question this episode comes off our Slack channel. It comes from Chris Smith, a member of that channel. He says, gentlemen, here's a question for you. What are the top 5 things you wish you knew before doing your first Leadville 100? It'd be great, he said, to hear from someone who just tried it for the first time last year, and maybe even someone who either just made or just missed the 12-hour cutoff. Chris, we'll have to get back to you on the 2022 first-timer, although I think there are plenty of those types of comments, both on the Slack channel and the participants page. Fatty, you've never missed the 12-hour, but I am sure there are at least 5 things you wished you knew before your first attempt.
Yeah, or after my 10th attempt, frankly. So these are going to be course-centric, and I'm going to list them in the order that you encounter them. Number 1, eat something at the starting line, 10 minutes before your corral is scheduled to go. Make this a couple hundred calories, a bonk breaker or a pro bar, since you are unlikely to find a good eating opportunity for a half hour or so after the race begins. Keep that, fill the pipe early and keep filling it often. Second one, and this is another one having to do with eating. Eat on the Columbine climb, or your race, frankly, is screwed. I did not learn this for like 15 years. Nutrition is important throughout the day, but it is so tempting to postpone it when your heart rate is pegged and you are breathing so hard, eating seems impossible, but it isn't impossible. And you have to do it, or you are going to crater about the time you get to that paved climb coming out of Twin Lakes Dam inbound. Number 3, you are not bonking as you go up the Columbine Trail. You're just experiencing altitude under race conditions. Regular bonk rules don't apply, where you just stop, dial it back or whatever. You just got to suffer until you get to the turnaround and then get down ASAP. Number 4, the power line is 4 miles. It's no less. Take a note of your mileage as you turn off the pavement, and don't let yourself be fooled into believing that you are done with the climb until you have actually done it. P.S. The last quarter mile of this climb is actually more or less flat, but don't think about that. 4 miles. Just remember 4 miles. That's all that can fit into your head in that moment. And then the final one, and this one has gotten so many people, including me, my first time, don't be surprised by the boulevard. It is not that long, and it is not that steep, except on race day when it becomes twice as long and twice as steep. I was completely blindsided by this climb the first time I raced Leadville, and this little sucker punch still colors my perception of that segment of the course to this day.
Your stuff is all race day or stuff. Mine's mostly pre-race day stuff or preparation stuff now. And I think the reason that is I was lucky enough to have a lot of information in front of me to go to get ready for the actual race. There was a film out already, right? There was I don't know how many years actual races there had been already by the time I showed up at that start line. So a lot of the mysteries you ran into, I didn't really have as an issue. But that's not to say I didn't make mistakes. I did plenty of them. So I'm going to do mine, I guess would be in reverse order, 5 to 1. In other words, the top one will be the last one you hear. Number 5 would be to ride my mountain bike more. I was a dedicated roadie and rode my road bike tons. I mean, I put in some pro-like hours on the road bike, but the mountain bike got maybe 10, 15% of the total time I was dedicating towards Leadville training. Just not enough. I figured being in shape's and being in shape. And that just isn't the case. You want to get on the mountain bike and get used to the way it jostles you around. The difference in power output is enough so that you definitely want to be on the mountain bike and feel how it is to push those pedals up either a sketchy climb or a climb where the traction isn't as good as you find on the tarmac. The power outputs can be quite sudden. Even though Leadville is long and on paper it kind of looks like it's sort of a road race, gravel race, it does have the punchy spots where you need those kind of typical mountain bike efforts. And I just didn't have quite enough of those going into my first Leadville 100. So number 5 would be ride my mountain bike. And I had a mountain bike too. It was a good one. I had an S-Works. Why not ride it? They're fun to ride, right?
It's a common mistake, though. People say that all the time, that it's a road race, that's being called a mountain bike race. But no, it's a mountain bike race. You need to ride your mountain bike race to be ready for this thing.
Number 4 would be you heard how many hours I put in. And I was putting in 18, 19 hours a week. I would say don't train like a pro. And it can create a bit of a mess. Overtraining, and I don't think I was overtrained. I was probably overreached. By the time I reached Leadville, I probably just done too much. Instead, I should have traded some of the time for, again, more mountain bike time, more focused stuff, maybe some more bike handling skills. I was waif and skinny, and I easily could have bulked up a little bit more. So done other things other than ride. And when I say don't train like a pro, I'm like, don't put in those kind of hours. It's just because you're working and you're doing other stuff. I was pretty worn out by the time the second Saturday in August hit. So I would say number 4, instead of using a negative, don't train, I would say train like a normal person, right? Number 3, once you do get into Leadville, and I guess this is still actually pre-race, ride less in Leadville. So I had 2 days to ride once I got in Leadville because I got there midweek. And I still think, even though I only rode 2 days, it was too much. Mm-hmm. I rode on Thursday, I rode Keevens and Sugarloaf and descended Powerline. And then the next day got up and rode to Twin Lakes from the pipeline section, right? So I essentially rode the whole pipeline section plus over to Twin Lakes. I think even though that doesn't sound like a lot, and it's not if it's spread out over the entirety of the week, I think doing that the 2 days leading into Leadville is too much. Even when I've had an entire week there, I think there have been times when I have ridden too much. The training is done. The course is just not that complicated. There's a couple of little hot spots that Fatty and I have talked about over and over on this show that you need to go check out. And then other than that, there's enough info out there. There's enough video out there that you're going to get the rest without going out and looking at it. And so I would say my number 3 would be ride less once you get in Leadville.
Yeah, I made that same mistake. I think even worse than you did, Hottie. The first time I did the Leadville 100, I actually rode the Columbine Mine Climb the day before the race.
Not good. Not good. Yeah.
Great legs, great lungs, very poor mind. What can I say? What's your number 2?
Number 2 actually was, you would think this would be number 1, but this was number 2. This was one of 2 reasons why I did not get a big buckle in my first attempt. And I had the fitness to do it. I mean, I could have done it, but I did 2 kind of silly things. And number 2 would be, or the second in my 5 to 1 list, is identify one time goal. I had 2 time goals on my top tube. It's ridiculous.
Oh, so like a fallback plan.
I had a fallback plan. And what happens in fallback plans?
You fall back.
You fall back. And it's exactly what I did. I had a sub 9 split list on my top tube and had a sub 10.
Yep.
And I took the latter. I did a sub 10.
Yeah.
It wasn't a bad time. It was 9:25 or whatever it was, but
it wasn't what you really wanted. Yeah, it's easy to give yourself an excuse if you've got it written down. Absolutely.
I don't know what I wanted. It's not what I wanted, but I should have been able to identify what I could do there. And I think other people were trying to hint to me too that no. You should be going for a sub 9 here. I had other people telling me that, look, dude, you are a heck of a good road racer and you're fit as hell and that big buckle is within your reach. But I didn't quite listen to them. I didn't know. I listened to my nonsense in my head, I guess, in the end, and wrote down 2 times and went for the latter. And then so the top one would be, and again, this relates to, these are the 2 things I think, execution things that I did poorly was my feeds were just too slow. Faster feeds. This is something we talk about all the time on the show. I've made, I don't know how many, we've made 2 complete episodes on doing fast feeds. I think I'm just trying to make good for this terrible error. I'll never forget, Fatty, I pulled into Twin Lakes. We did the main dam the first time I raced it, and Mrs. Hottie was there, and I got off my bike. I mean, I pulled in, I got off my bike, and she was being assisted by a mechanic who'd been to Leadville before. And he was looking at me like I was from another planet. What are you doing? Why are you walking around here in the pit? And why? You should be out of here by now. And that's what he was saying on his face. He wasn't verbalizing that. He later told me, like, I don't understand what you were doing in Twin Lakes there. You should have been out of there and staying with a good group or staying on pace. But I didn't. I stood around and got my snacks and had a talk with Mrs. Hottie, and then I got out of there.
I mean, it sounds like crazy when you and I talk about it, but for years and years, we did the exact same thing. And I've talked many times before about when Rebecca Rush coached Lisa through doing the Leadville 100 and said, you are fit enough to do a sub 9 if you make a few adjustments. And the one you just pegged was one of the 2 things. She was like, you are sitting down and having a sandwich. You are going 0 miles per hour during that time. She knocked a half hour off Lisa's time just by saying, you are going to put a foot down, you are going to change bottles, and you are going to go. That it really does. It changes everything when you treat the whole thing like a race. Her other change was, I'm adding one more Rebecca Rushism here, and that is pedal, 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 pedal. You never stop working, I guess would be, if Rebecca were here, that would be her addition to the list we've given her. I think this is we've given a good set of lessons learned for any first timer or second timer or 25th timer.
Sure thing. Okay, folks, keep those LFAQs coming. Chris Smith, thank you for your question. I think you got more than maybe you asked for right there. But if you need more, write us back. We might put you in another LFAQ segment. Another thing, Fatty, I'm trying to think back to what I wore that first Leadville 100. I don't believe there were any mistakes with, what I was wearing. But I know one thing, it was not DNA clothing. And now that I think about it, actually, I wasn't wearing a custom kit, and it was pretty atrocious looking. So yeah, let's chalk my clothing up as a mistake. So 5B, I guess it would be, at least as far as the look goes. And if I could do it again, I would be on the DNA site drawing up my Leadville look.
Oh, I'm not trying to one-up you, Hottie, but I do remember what I was wearing my first Leadville 100. It was a wool Swobo jersey, which did 2 things. My sweat soaked it, and all the weight of everything I had in my jersey pockets eventually made it sag to the point that my jersey was actually getting hung up on the back of my saddle. And this is the worst part, that thing chafed my nipples. I as I cross the line, I have a photo of, you've seen this on marathoners many times, I'm sure, but blood soaking through the jersey in 2 points. It was not a good look, and it did not feel good for about 3 days. So,
Whoa, wow.
Yeah, it is one of those things that is not easy to admit, but most of us cyclists not just to feel good, but we do like to look good too. Off the bike, my wardrobe is pretty generic. I'm a t-shirt and hoodie guy. On the bike, thanks to DNA, I look, I would say, as good as anyone else at the start line, if not better. And that is important to me. You know, Hadi, how you say food is mood? Well, the same could be said for what you're wearing. When I'm in a nice looking kit that is color coordinated, often to match to the decals on my bike, well, it matters to me and I feel great. And that matters to how your race day is going to go.
Yeah, a poor-fitting, ugly kit is no way to get your Leadville 100 going. That's why Fatty and I love getting in our race day jersey and endurance bibs, and we love looking down at that custom logo on the chest because it starts the ride or race off right. Ultimately, you're going to do the work that gets you that buckle, but feeling and looking good is totally what DNA can do for you.
So head over to DNA Cycling and think about what you want to look like and how you want to feel on race day. DNA's custom program is at dnacycling.com. Make sure you let them know that the Leadville podcast sent you.
Like we said at the top, we are getting into recovery on this show with a focus on how well we are recovering. One of the newer metrics athletes are using is something called heart rate variability. HRV is measured nowadays with a wearable like from Whoop or the Aura Smart Ring. Garmin is even into this space with some products. This has become quite a trend amongst pros. If you follow like Ted King or Phil Guyman, they often make reference to their Whoop score, so it has definitely got our interest as well.
Yeah, Hadi, until recently, I honestly didn't even know that this existed, but it's definitely worth tracking, especially as we start pouring on the training hours. But I want to hear from an expert. So that's what we're going to do this episode.
Yeah, thanks to our friends at The Feed, Dr. Kevin Sprouse is back with us. He is trained and certified in both sports and emergency medicine and is an advisor to The Feed. He serves as the head of medicine for EF Education First Pro Cycling. He has worked with pro athletes, PGA golfers, NFL and MLB players, Olympic track and field athletes. He has worked in emergency rooms and feed zones. He advises pro cyclists on their rate of recovery and helps them interpret what their wearables are telling them.
Dr. Sprouse, it's great to have you back on the show. Welcome.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
So Hadi wanted to talk about heart rate variability, and it is awesome to have a thinker and a student as one of the hosts. And also there is the other guy, me, who basically has gotten by just riding my bike a lot. So I don't even know what this is. Start me from the beginning.
HRV, heart rate variability, is a metric that's actually been around since, I think, at least the 1950s. Although it's only relatively recently, that it's kind of gained visibility in public. And that's because for years it required a 12-lead ECG machine. So you had to go into like a cardiologist office or whatever. And there was no way that, there was no utility in that for someone just on a day-to-day basis. But now that we have computers in our pockets and devices that will measure heart rate, we can get HRV. The reason, well, first let's say, what is HRV? If you think of a heart rate of 60, if sitting here right now, your heart rate is 60, you probably think you're having a heartbeat every second, right? And that would make sense. 60 beats per minute, 1 beat per second, but it doesn't work that way. What actually happens is you have a heartbeat, and then you have another one at 0.9 seconds, another one at 0.85, another one at 0.9, and then maybe 1.2. So there's variability between each beat. And that variability is due to a number of things, primarily that have to do with the autonomic nervous system. So we've got the nervous system that we control, and then we've got the nervous system that just kind of runs in the background. That's the autonomic nervous system. And the two parts of that are the sympathetic and the parasympathetic. So sympathetic is fight or flight. It's, somebody scares you. Your sympathetic nervous system goes into overdrive, and everything you feel there is sympathetic. Parasympathetic is you just had a big meal, you're lying down on the TV, in front of the TV to watch the Super Bowl, and just kind of veg out. That's parasympathetic, rest and digest. So they're kind of polar opposites. The balance of those two create a strong variability beat to beat. When they're out of balance, one of them predominates its neurologic pressure on the mechanisms that manage heart rate, and it makes it much less varied because you've just got this one input. Okay. So HRV is a measure of how varied it is. People think of it, or a lot of people think of it as being a cardiac metric. It's not a cardiac metric at all. It's a neurologic metric that uses the heart as its output to measure, right? So we're using the heart to tell us what the nervous system is doing. When the HRV is high, you've got good balance and good recovery, good health in general. And when it's low, typically it's out of balance, maybe even sick, injured, any number of things. So with that information on a day-to-day basis, you can start to see when you deviate from your baseline and which direction you might be deviating. So a lot of us are familiar with following a resting heart rate, right? You wake up every morning, your resting heart rate's 45. 45, 45, 45. It starts to get boring. 46, 44. And then one day you wake up and you didn't sleep very well, feel a little bit hot, you got some sinus pressure, a little bit of a cough, and your resting heart rate is 62, right? It tells you that physiologically things are moving in a suboptimal direction. We use HRV in the same way.
Heart rate variability sounds like a bad thing, but it's not. That's what you're saying.
Increased variability is generally good. Now, anything, just like with resting heart rate, we think, I want a low resting heart rate. It can go too low, and it can go low for the wrong reasons. But in most cases, HRV is going to, a higher HRV or an increasing HRV is going to be indicative of good recovery and resilience most of the time.
How is it different? How is HRV different from cardiac drift?
Cardiac drift is a term that's used for something you might see on the bike. So if you're out training for 4 hours and in hour one, you're holding 180 watts for an extended period of time, and your heart rate for that effort is 130 beats. And then in hour 4, you do the same effort, 180 watts, but you see that you're, instead of 130 beats a minute, you're at 148. That's drift. You've, for whatever reason, for numerous reasons, you've got a different heart rate for the same effort.
So why do athletes, specifically endurance athletes, ultra endurance athletes, why should they care about heart rate variability?
Well, they might not, and that's a legitimate look at it. The reason I say that is because just because you can measure something doesn't mean you need to, right? And for a lot of us, I've used the analogy of a power meter in the past that, you could be, prior to SRM being invented and power meters becoming just, everywhere, just part of every bike, people still rode competitively and rode fast, and they did well and they trained well, right? They didn't need the power numbers to do well, but there is something to be gained from the power numbers. So if you have a new cyclist now who comes to you and says, hey, I'm thinking about getting a bike, what should I get? Your first answer wouldn't be, oh, you need to get this power meter, right? It'd just be, get out there and start training, just volume. And so I don't think it's pertinent to everyone necessarily. But for a lot of us, it's now very easy to gather the data passively, whether that's with a Whoop or an Oura Ring or an Apple Watch or a Garmin. I mean, all these devices are measuring HRV now while you sleep, as well as during workouts, but that's less interesting. What we're talking about is HRV overnight, how you recover. And because it is so easy to gather, and because it tends to track very closely to your fatigue and how you're adapting to training load, and it tends to move before you have the perception of going in a certain direction. In other words, if you're starting to get into an overreaching scenario, you may still feel really good, but you start to see your HRV tanking, and that can be a good sign that you need to back off a bit. or you start to get sick, or you start to, you haven't slept well for a couple nights, and it can be a good reminder that's not the time to push really hard.
That's all Fatty knows how to do, though, is push hard. In fact, a lot of athletes will just, look, we're endurance cyclists, right? Our whole being says, push through the pain, push through, keep going, right? Are there, how do we use this information then? How closely should we pay attention to it?
I think that's exactly why we should use it, because our tendency is to push really hard. Most coaches in the endurance space who work with athletes who are, even moderately accomplished, so not just trying to do a couch to 5K, but they've been doing something for a while, that coach's role is often to pull the reins as opposed to prod them, right? Typically, we do have a tendency to go until we can't. And that's really counterproductive from a training standpoint. There are numerous studies that have been published looking at using heart rate variability to guide the day's training. So in other words, not having a calendar built out for a week or 4 weeks or whatever, but waking up and saying, how recovered are you based on HRV numbers? And then planning your training for that day around that recovery number. So if you're really fresh, you push hard, you do intervals, et cetera. If you are a little sluggish on the recovery, you back it down, maybe take a day off or do an easy recovery ride. And a number of those studies would suggest that that's a better way to train, such that you get better results long term, and more importantly, you get more longevity of your training, more resilience, less breaks due to injuries, illness, et cetera. I won't say that that's a slam dunk case in the literature, but that's kind of the idea behind it. And there's some good support for that.
So how should I measure my HRV then?
I think the easiest way to do it is to use a device like Whoop or Oura Ring, or, if you wear a Garmin watch already, a lot of athletes that I work with in my practice already have a Garmin watch. So, don't go buy something, use what you have. And just start to pay attention to it. So again, going back to that power meter analogy, if you have somebody who gets their first power meter, you don't prescribe workouts based on it week one. You take a few weeks or a month and you just collect data, right? You kind of see what does their power output look like? What's their variation? How can you estimate their FTP? And then you start to use it. I think the same can be said for HRV. Collect it for a month. Pay attention to it, look at it, but don't change what you do. Just kind of start to get a gestalt of what happens. If you have a few beers and you stay up a little late, what does HRV look like the next night? If you have 2 or 3 really hard days of training, what does it look like? If you have a day off and slept really well, what does it look like? And then you get an idea for how it moves. The other thing I do with my athletes is I don't pay a lot of attention to a single day's reading. If it's dramatically different, yes. But what I'm looking for is a 3-day trend. So if for 3 days in a row, their HRV is declining, I want to know why, right? If it's 1 and it bounces back up, it could be a measurement error. It could be any number of things. But if it's 3 in a row, I want to know what's happening. By the same token, if it's 3 in a row increasing, that's probably some time to add on some volume, some intensity, and take advantage of that.
So do these devices, they give you a score? Is that how they work?
Yeah, so most of the devices will give you a recovery score or a readiness score or whatever they call it from a proprietary standpoint. That I'm less interested in, quite honestly. That's an algorithmic number that they present to someone when you first open the app that's meant to distill HRV, how you slept, resting heart rate, everything they collect, they distill into one number and show it to you. I think it's more meaningful to look at the raw numbers. And so I would typically just say, look at the HRV number in this case. The others are meaningful. If the HRV is drifting one way or the other, look at how you slept. Look at how long you slept, the quality of your sleep. Look at your skin temperature. Is it up nearly a degree? And maybe you're starting to get sick. We saw during COVID, a lot of these wearables, when your respiratory rate would jump by 1 breath per minute overnight, and your recovery declined, it was a pretty good indication that you might be getting sick, and that might be COVID. It trended surprisingly close. So there is value in looking at the others, but I would start by just watching that HRV.
Okay. Can we monitor HRV without technology?
No. I mean, the ways that you can do it without buying a device are you can use the camera of your phone and put your finger over it, and it'll detect a heart rate, kind of like the pulse oximeters in the hospital. I'm not convinced that that's a really accurate way. We're looking at millisecond changes between beats, so I don't know. That would not be my first choice. Although there are a couple apps that do that are pretty sophisticated. So I'm not saying they wouldn't be a way to go, but that's if you already have the device, a smartphone that'll do that. That may be a great place to start. You can also do it with a Bluetooth-enabled heart rate strap. The problem I have with either of those, though, is that you do it in a way that you're very cognizant of what you're doing. You have to wake up and actively do this, whereas the others measure it while you're asleep. There's nothing. Your brain's not going yet, and so it's a cleaner measurement, I think.
Yeah, those wearing a strap at night would be terribly invasive. I mean, and hard to sleep with one. I leave that for the interval sessions, for the actual bike sessions.
Well, you don't wear one all the time, Hottie?
No,
You're not wearing one right now?
Yeah, no. I mean, like a lot of technology, and like Dr. Sprouse has already said, sometimes I don't wear a heart rate monitor when I'm on my bike. Sometimes it's good just to put that away and say, I'm going out for an easy ride, right? So you don't need to look at the data all the time. So let's say we've gotten accustomed to monitoring our heart rate variability, and now we're into race week, and we're at Leadville, no less. So we're at altitude, and it's race week. Should we be monitoring during race week? And how does altitude affect all this?
I think that depends on the individual. Because one of the things you have to recognize is that you can have an amazing performance on a day where you have a low recovery score or low HRV. Again, it's trends, right? And the reasons behind these things. So if you go to altitude, your HRV is going to plummet. It just is. Your resting heart rate is going to go up, HRV is going to plummet, and there's going to be some time before it normalizes. There's some thought that if you're training at altitude, you can actually use that as an indicator of when you can start to push. Like if you're going to train in Leadville a couple months ahead of the race, you don't want to get there on day one and push hard, right? You want to acclimate a bit and then train. So in that regard, it can be a useful tool. But race week, unless you're someone who can really divorce yourself from the psychology involved in seeing a recovery number and it impacting how you perform. In other words, kind of this chicken and egg idea. It's probably best not to look at it. You may open the app, download it so you have it historically to look at if you're interested, or if you have a coach or somebody you're working with. But that's probably not the time to look at it. In the same way that you can't, nothing you do training wise is going to improve. Like you can't get to Leadville and be like, oh, I just need to get these last few rides in. That's the wrong mindset. Once you're there, the work has been done, the foundation has been laid. Like it's going to be what it's going to be. And so for most people, I would say, don't look at it. Maybe gather the data, but don't stress.
Yeah. I mean, if anything, maybe early in the week or early in your time there, just to see if you are starting to rest at all. And then I think put the thing away once you get 3-4 days before the race comes out. So, of course, I'm the curious type. I'd love to know. It would be interesting to see.
Well, and some people can see it and totally recognize that it doesn't determine their performance. Right. And I work with athletes who they're actually more comfortable knowing, even if the numbers are awful. They're fine as long as they know what it is. And so it really does depend.
You mentioned COVID. I'm wondering about, long COVID, or if somebody has an arrhythmia, they probably should not be racing Leadville if they have one, or other medical, especially cardiac conditions. How can these affect heart rate variability readings or accuracy?
Yeah. Long COVID, I'm not sure. I would expect that there might be some depression of HRV, but I couldn't answer that with any expertise. For the others, though, for various cardiac conditions, it will typically depress HRV. So the most common arrhythmia that you find in endurance athletes is AFib, right? And I think that's one that most people have probably heard of. It's basically where the top chambers of the heart don't beat in sync with the lower ones. And if you're currently in AFib can come and go. I actually had AFib. A couple years ago, was diagnosed with AFib, ended up having an ablation to get rid of it. And what I saw was that nights where I was in AFib, my wearable did not pick up an HRV or even a resting heart rate because it was all over the place. It just didn't know what to do with it. When I was not in AFib, I typically had a depressed HRV. And then after my ablation, where they go in and burn a part of the heart so that that errant signal isn't kind of propagating, my HRV has been about 50% of what it was pre-ablation. So all that to say, mine is just a case of one. I've seen similar things in other people, but you can expect that it will alter those numbers. But I do think somebody who has AFib or another arrhythmia that is well controlled, either through medication or is infrequent enough, and they've talked with their doctor or probably a sports cardiologist too, they can absolutely race Leadville. I think it'd be perfectly fine. But they might see some of these disruptions in HRV.
No, this has been a great introduction to me. I appreciate you sort of laying out what it is, what it's good for, when it's valuable. So thanks very much.
No problem. I'd say get a device or just put one of the apps on your phone and just play with it. What I found most interesting when I first started using it, maybe 10 years ago, 12 years ago, where you had to put a strap on and connect to your phone and is how well it tracked with what I perceived, which you can say, okay, well, that's ridiculous. You already knew, why do you need it then? Well, it goes back to the idea that we push ourselves, right? So if you know that you're feeling tired and you've got a big workout planned or a group ride, you can either bail and say, okay, I feel tired, and take both the internal shame and the shame from your friends for that, or you can get an objective validation that, yeah, your body's worn down and it's time to pull the plug. And that's where I find it's useful for a lot of athletes, is just that kind of giving them, allowing them to respect the sensations they already feel.
Well, Dr. Sprouse, thanks again for all the great info on this. This is a topic I've been curious about for a while, about getting a device, about monitoring this. And again, thanks for checking on our hearts. We appreciate it.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks, guys.
Again, thanks to Dr. Kevin Sprouse. If you would like to reach out to his team, check out podiumsports.net. And by the way, Dr. Sprouse will be back with us in a future episode this season to talk about another complicated yet important topic, thermoregulation.
It's worth mentioning that Dr. Sprouse's segment on this program is brought to you by The Feed, which is a great program for our listeners.
Yeah, how would you like to have $80 to spend on any nutrition brand or product that fuels your training or racing? Right now, you can receive $80 in annual credit at The Feed.
The Feed is the largest online marketplace for athletes to shop sports nutrition, high-performance supplements, and recovery gear you need to make your workout even better.
So claim your $80 annual credit at thefeed.com/Leadville, register your email, verify your phone number, and then you're all set to spend your first Feed credit of $20 right away.
Okay, time to recover from this show because another is right around the corner. Fatty and I are on social media, on Instagram. I'm at Michael Hunton, and of course, we are both on the Facebook Leadville 100 Mountain Bike Participants page. That's a long word. That's a long title, actually, for a Facebook page, but there it is. A lot of good stuff there. And if you want to have a conversation, join our Slack channel. You'll find a link to it over at leadville.fm/Slack.
Yeah, if you like this show, please go to Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star rating, and write us a review. To see all the ways you can find this show, it is leadville.fm.
Good luck in your riding, racing, and recovery. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you at the start line.